Well, great. Well, thank you for having us here again this evening. I'm Paul Terrio with Plante, Moran, Real Point. I have a couple colleagues with me here this evening. Kevin Donnelly, who's a Senior Vice President with us in the public sector practice. And as well, Greg Van Kirk, who's a partner with the firm that runs our public sector practice as well. So you'll probably see more of Greg at the next meeting. So we have a lot to go through. We'll try to keep it moving. Really wanted to touch base briefly on some of the enrollment and utilization results that we talked about the last couple of meetings. Talk about the construction market, which has been a little bit crazy the last few years since COVID, and some of the impacts that that's had on your current bond and on some of the assessment data that we put together. Again, some of the impacts on the current bond from all of that. And then talk through the facility assessment that we've spent the last few months putting together. And then some key takeaways. So I'm going to start off and then I'll hand it over to Kevin here in a minute. So this is a slide everyone has seen before. This is our 5-year enrollment projections. I'm not going to get into all the details, but you can see basically that what we're seeing over the next 5 years is that your enrollment is going to start to flatten out. Over the course of the 5 years, we have a net loss of about 200 students, with the middle school going up slightly, the high school and the elementary is going down slightly. But the net of that is about 200 students from a head count perspective. As well, this is some data we looked at the last presentation. Again, just to highlight the utilization numbers. And as a reminder, we're not looking for 100% utilization at buildings. That would be a little bit too full. We're really looking for about 85% is kind of the sweet spot, so to speak. Your elementaries are pretty much right there at 84%. The middle schools and high schools are significantly lower, down in the high 50s. And then the other buildings, about 61%. That includes Harbor, the IA, and Apollo. And then overall, we're about 67%. We did make one little adjustment from the numbers last time, and I put a footnote there at the bottom. At Harbor and Brooks, we had a couple of adult ed classrooms that we last time included those in the count. This time we kind of took them out. We thought it was skewing the data a little bit to count them. So that did raise that building's utilization up closer to 50%, but it's still pretty low considering. As everyone probably knows, and as everyone's definitely seen at the grocery store, and if you're shopping for anything really, new cars, electronics, whatever it may be, COVID has wreaked havoc on global supply chains. Again, been in the news a lot. From a construction perspective, it has had a horrific effect. We've seen prices go up in the last 3 years, 4 years, about 40 to 60%. To give some perspective, for probably about 30 years before that, steadily we would have seen prices go up about 3% a year from a labor and material standpoint, pretty consistently, almost like clockwork. Maybe it'd be 4% one year, maybe it'd be 2% another, but it was pretty much 3%. And again, to put some perspective around it, new construction before the pandemic, we were looking at about $250 to $275 a square foot to build a new elementary school or a new middle school or a new high school. Now that number is closer to $400 a foot. That is a huge thing to deal with in the middle of a bond. It's a huge thing to deal with if you plan a bond and it's out for vote and now you pass it and you've got to decide what to do. It affects operating costs, it affects sinking fund dollars, it affects a lot of different things. Not only that, but the construction market, because when COVID hit, a lot of projects got shelved or got paused, has really exploded, especially in southeastern Michigan. If you look around town, pretty much everything's under construction, whether it's downtown with all the projects down there, Henry Ford, all the stuff in the District of Detroit, all the Bedrock projects, or all the school bonds that are going on. There's more $100 million plus school bonds, $200, $300, $500 million plus school bonds than there have ever been. All that really pinches the labor supply, and it puts a lot of pressure on manufacturing to be able to keep up with mechanical units, electrical gear, things like that. So lead times have become really long, and prices have gone up. This slide just gives an idea. This is some data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. You can see the roller coaster over here on the upper right. That's some commodities prices. You can see plywood, as an example, went up 100%, then dropped like a rock, and then went back up to almost 100% again. So when you're trying to design projects and plan projects 2, 3, 4 years out, it becomes very complicated. We had projects where we had planned to use steel joists and deck and had to stop the design, switch to precast concrete, and then that became too expensive, switch back to structural I-beams and columns and things, all while you're trying to hit a deadline and get architects and engineers to be able to, Bill's laughing over there, be able to get architects and engineers to hit a schedule while you're constantly changing the design because prices are fluctuating so much that nobody knows which way to look next. Why do I bring this all up? This is definitely a variable that's had a big impact on Huron Valley schools and on a lot of K-12 districts in Southeast Michigan and across the country. Some of those impacts are that there are projects that were originally intended to be completed with the bond that have not started yet. The 3 middle schools obviously have not had major renovations yet. Harbor Brook Center, the Early Childhood Center at Johnson, which was part of the original plan, and the administration building. So all those projects are somewhat on hold right now until the dust settles, so to speak. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, you know, when you spend $180 million, a lot of times people think the entire building was renovated. But the reality is there's never enough money to do everything. So it becomes a little bit of, you know, how do we best spend our dollars? And I think you guys have done a great job with that. But there are some things that have not been completed. At the elementary school level, most of the roofs have not been done. The toilet rooms have not been renovated. The kitchens have not been renovated. Exterior windows, classroom casework, mechanical systems, fire alarm systems, etc. A lot of those are the most expensive parts of the building. If you think about your home, kitchen, bathroom renovations, furnaces, things like that. So there's still a lot of need out there. So when you see some of those dollars a couple slides from now, you'll know why. And then at the middle school, high school level, very similar, right? Roofs, toilet rooms, kitchens, locker room spaces, windows, doors, etc. So just want to kind of give some perspective before we get into the next few slides. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Kevin and let him do this section.
Thanks, Paul. Probably need the remote. All right. Kevin Donnelly of Plante, Moran, happy to be here tonight. I've been engaged with our team, working behind the scenes, walking your buildings since last June, or this past June. So I've been working on the project for 4 months, had a great opportunity to walk all your buildings. I think you guys are doing some great work through the current bond. Elementary schools are in fantastic shape. Obviously, as Paul had mentioned, we have a lot more work to consider as we move forward to the next bond, but it's been a pleasure walking your facilities thus far. What this overview represents is just all of your current buildings and assets. Your 8 elementary buildings, currently 3 middle schools, 2 high schools, and all your ancillary buildings. The note up to the top I think is kind of impactful. The average age of your building is 53 years old. So if you think of your home by example, if you had a 53-year-old building, just the maintenance, the regular upkeep that you need, and unless you're passing and working on continuous bond programs one after another, there's obviously going to be some need that you need to play some catch up with. Geographically, laying out where all the projects are at on a map, I think that's helpful to kind of see where it falls geographically within your district. The process that we went through, obviously, like I mentioned, we've been working for the last 4 to 5 months. We walked all the buildings, looked at it through the lens of a 10-year capital program, categorized everything into really 3 big buckets. Critical needs, which is your 1 to 3 year priorities. Deferred maintenance, which really falls in your 4 to 6 year category. And then building enhancements, priority 3, which is more of a 7 to 10 year outlook, which makes up your 10-year capital plan. We've been meeting behind the scenes with facilities on a continual basis the last 4 to 5 months. And over the last probably month and a half, been working closely with administration to really calibrate this information that we're going to look at here in a moment. But I think we're in a good place. Really the big buckets of how we go about our assessment and what we look at. Pie chart kind of representing all the different categories that you have in any typical building or facility. Your FF&E and technology, the site, the envelope, obviously the interior of the building, and then all your guts of the building, the mechanicals and electricals, which we've assessed at each different facility. A lot to look at here. It's a little overwhelming, so I encourage you to take a look at it on your own. But what we've done is for all 17 of your facilities, we've gone through and broke it down into each work category, whether it's new construction, the envelope, the interiors, the mechanicals, electricals, so on and down the line, which really gets you to the total on the right-hand side. We've looked at your 10-year capital program. I know that number's a little overwhelming, but really the needs you have out there based on our assessment over the next 10 years is $436 million. Pie chart kind of representing the different categories per system that I just mentioned on that spreadsheet. It's broken out into a pie chart. Mentioned earlier the 10-year capital plan, how we've broken the work down into really 3 key buckets, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 10. This is how the dollars are allocated in each priority level, tying us out to the total that I just mentioned a moment ago. We like our pie charts. Here's another pie chart kind of representing the priorities based on the categories. Also included, outside of just your normal building construction related items, just some of the other ancillary costs that we've included. Obviously, over the next 10 years, you're going to need more buses. So we've accounted for 24 buses to keep the facilities folks happy and keep them with good equipment to maintain the buildings, trucks, mowers, plows, maintenance and custodial equipment. Obviously, you'll need to refresh through a period of time your musical equipment, athletic equipment, and your instructional equipment, which we've identified and we have included. So what are some of the potential funding sources? You are sold right now through Series 1 of the 19 bond program. You have another series yet to sell. Just sold it, which you just sold, at approximately $70 million. You have a current sinking fund in place, which is $3 million per year, which is good through 2025. And then we're looking at right now a potential bond program in 2025 or 26 with no new taxes of approximately $165 million. Just from an operation and maintenance standpoint, what does it cost to typically maintain your buildings on a year-to-year basis? $7 to $10 per square foot, and what that includes is all your utilities, all your insurance costs, typical maintenance and repairs, which again runs typically in any one of your buildings about $7 to $10 a square foot. And this really just represents the three things that we've been focused on through our engagement. As we've talked about in previous meetings, and we talked about tonight, we've updated all the enrollment projections, we've done building utilization, and obviously as part of the assessment, just trying to determine long-term needs under the capital plan, budgeting for that work, and then opportunities to fund that work in the near term through future bond issues. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul.
Thanks, Kevin. Actually, I want to just jump back to this slide real quick, just for some perspective. We thought it was important to talk about operation and maintenance costs. It's something that gets overlooked a lot, but as Kevin mentioned, about $7 to $10 a foot is typically what we would see. And if you think about a building that's 50,000 square feet or 100,000 square feet, that could be $500,000 to $1 million a year to operate and maintain that building. That's just the day-to-day normal stuff. That's not the boiler breaking. That's not major mechanical improvements. So if we start to talk about how do we pay for some of these programs that we've heard so much about the last few presentations, one way is the less square footage you have to keep the lights on, to keep heated, to keep cleaned, to keep under good repair, the more money you have in your operation budget for teacher salaries, for additional programming and things like that. Another thing to keep in mind, that 7 to 10 is really if we're talking about an entire building per se. If we're talking about, just a wing or just a smaller square footage, it's probably not 7 to 10. It's probably more like 4 to 5 or something along those lines. So just keep that in mind as we kind of talk further. So key takeaways. As always, as Dr. Salah said, we're going back to the strategic plan and really looking for that to drive everything that we've been engaged to do. Really, number 2 there, the resources and infrastructure is the big one. If you look at some of the objectives under the implementation there, so conduct an analysis of building utilization. That's obviously what we talked about at the last meeting. We feel like we've got a good handle on where we're at utilization across the district. Number 2, look at construction trends and birth rates, enrollment projections essentially. That was what we talked about our second meeting that we presented. So we feel like we've done that. And the third one down there is conduct an analysis of grade level configurations related to building utilization. One thing, as we've looked at different numbers and looked at the districts, a lot of times when we come into a district, we do talk a lot about grade reconfiguration. Can we go to a lower L, upper L, middle school, high school model? Is there something geographically that makes sense to do in different cities or different communities? We don't really see that having a big effect here. Really, your elementary schools are very well utilized. The middle schools and high schools, not as well. But if we start to if we were to look at pulling 5th graders, let's say, out of the elementaries and moving them up to the middle schools, essentially what we're doing is we're just shuffling the deck. We don't see that as being a solution here. So as much as we've looked at it, we just don't see that as being one of the recommendations at this time. And there's obviously other parts of the strategic plan as well that the district is taking the lead on down below. Oops, and then, I guess this is the next page. And then the other one I wanted to point out is engaging bond advisors and financial consultants about current debt. So we've obviously talked about that, that there's a potential for a future bond issue in a few years as well. So what does all this mean? There are a lot of variables. We've hit on a few tonight. We've hit on some others earlier. There's the dollars. If you go back to the triangle, there's utilization, there's enrollment, there's the funding sources available. There's also, if you were to decide to vacate a building, what does it cost to abate it or demolish it? What about redeveloping the property? Does it have, what's the value of the property underneath and to whom? Would it be single family? Would it be retail? Would it be multifamily or other? There's just a lot of different variables, whether it's construction costs, even if you look at mechanical systems, there's 5 or 6 different solutions sometimes that have drastically different costs associated with them. And obviously you've got enrollments that we projected, but as you may hear, probably sometime, I know you guys just had count day. Sometimes those projections are spot on, sometimes they're a little bit higher or lower than are expected. And obviously you've got count day coming up after the first of the year too. So. And then district boundaries. So if we're talking about potentially closing buildings, what does that do to district boundaries, feeder patterns? That has a big impact, especially if you think back to the map with a lot of big green areas within the district, right? Whether it's Highland Rec or Kensington or Proud Lake or what have you. So really with all these different variables at play to try to get this big of a group direction, we've kind of taken the next step and put some of them on paper. These are things we definitely want to get into at the next meeting in more detail, but we thought it would be helpful to kind of put them down on paper and kind of talk through them. So we believe that the Early Childhood Center at Apollo should remain and that was a good investment by the district, but that the satellite early childhood that was contemplated for Johnson should probably be put on hold right now given the money that's left in the bond. And that would maybe be part of a future bond program. Current grade configurations, as I mentioned, we don't believe need to be altered and are not going to solve the problem at hand. We believe that the district should remain an 8 elementary district, but should become a 2 middle school district and remain a 2 high school district with IA staying at Lakeland. And then we believe you should also look at the location of Harbor High and the adult ed program that are over at the Brooks Center. as well, looking at different scenarios, which again we're going to get into a lot more at the next meeting, but running some different scenarios about what does that exactly look like, where would those programs go, where would they fit, what are the renovation costs, what are the demolition costs. Again, there's a lot of different variables to it. What we're hoping to do is be able to put three to five scenarios on paper for the group to consider and evaluate, put some dollars to those, talk about timelines, talk about funding, and help facilitate that conversation. And then the last bullet is really just to talk about those feeder patterns again and what those district boundaries look like. So 8 to 2 to 2 is fairly simple, but which 8 into which 2 into which 2, and then where do those district boundaries need to be adjusted to make the numbers work out? Because we don't want to have two middle schools, one with 1,100 kids and one with 700 kids. We want to make them somewhat equitable. The buildings are very similar in size. The high school buildings are similar in size. We want to make sure that there's a balance all the way through so that we don't solve one problem and create another. And then putting cost to all those different scenarios will take a little bit of effort as well. That is pretty much it. Just a reminder, we've got another meeting November 1st and then November 29th. At the November 1st meeting, again, we're going to look to present 3 to 5 scenarios for the group to consider. Obviously, the bullet points that we just put out are all going to be up for discussion as well. You know, we want a healthy conflict and healthy discussion around the data that's been provided and, you know, where that data takes us. So.